It's the last weekend of our careers. It's the last weekend of our careers. No, it's the last weekend newscast of the year. And I look like I've been inflated with the bicycle pump. And you've come dressed as Mrs. Claus. Dear.
Regular listeners might know that sometimes at the weekends things go slightly awry, and Paddy and I start laughing about I'm not quite sure what. But today it will all be very serious, apart from I have come dressed as Mrs. Claus and there is tinsel around the newscast television, courtesy of producer Chris. So we say welcome one and all to our festive edition of Saturday's newscast, the last Saturday newscast of 2025. We will be talking about all sorts of things this afternoon, but not least the clash between the government and the BMA, the Union of Medical Doctors, which at the moment represents resident doctors, used to be called junior doctors. And they are in a political standoff, not just with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, but the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who's trying to persuade them not to go on strike while flu is spreading at pace across the NHS. So we'll be talking about that this afternoon, among other things.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura in the studio, and I have stopped laughing now.
Well, I'm not surprised, faced with this news agenda.
Yes. What are you waving around and why?
This is a copy of The Guardian.
Yes.
Critics of BBC will say, shock as BBC person reads The Guardian.
Well, I was slightly thinking about that. However, The Guardian's important today because it's where the Prime Minister has, in no uncertain terms, told resident doctors, those of a younger generation, that it would be an awful thing to do if they go on strike while flu is raging through the nation. And he says it really in pretty stark terms. So I know earlier in the week, Adam and co talked about what's going on in the doctor's strike and the various different issues. That this weekend opens with a real political standoff with the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, using very, very punchy language to have a go at the British Medical Association and make all sorts of claims about they'd be doing a terrible thing if they do actually walk out on strike next week.
Yeah. The Prime Minister's article calls it reckless. I'll put this down now. You can take it from me. It does.
But reckless, that's really strong language, isn't it?
There's an survey, an indicative survey running this weekend of doctors, BMA members, to see if they want to cancel strike action or not. And the poll results, the survey results will come out on Monday. So this intervention is deliberately timed to hit their decision-making process. And many people in the BMA say it comes over really clumsily because the NHS can cope. The NHS is not collapsing.
And guess what? There's spin on all sides in this standoff, no surprise. But you do have the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary both cranking up the rhetoric, I think in quite an emotive way, to say not just to resident doctors, you shouldn't strike, but also to say to the country, look, this strike might be happening, but we really hope that you sympathise with us as the politicians trying to stop this happening with the damage that there could be to patient care. But they're also using what some people describe as this super flu that's going right around the country. I know almost everyone I know has had flu in the last couple of weeks, to say that this strike action would basically be unforgivable because of what's going on in hospitals right now, and warning that the NHS could almost sort of collapse under the weight of it. But it's interesting, as you said, a senior figure in the NHS today, the medical director in London, suggested actually what is going on is still within the bounds of what the NHS could cope with. So you've got to be careful with the spin on both sides here.
Yeah, he's Chris Strether. Well within the boundaries. This flu outbreak is different, we are told by health colleagues, and also listening to Newscast with Adam, because it started spreading earlier. We all know about waves of infection. We were educated the hard way during COVID. So flu happens every year. Hello, we know that happens every year. It's coinciding with Christmas. It's coinciding with strike action that is currently the subject of this political argument. As a Labour Prime Minister who believes in workers' right to strike, how surprised are you by the intervention by the Prime Minister as well as the Health Secretary?
I think it's interesting and I think it's significant, and I think it tells you how worried actually the government is about it.
Because they made the 29% pay rise, and they were told at the time by political opponents, you haven't got much out of the doctors in return for giving them 29%.
And remember too that one of the things that Wes Streeting offered people when they were in opposition, he said, as a Labour Health Secretary, I'll be able to sort out the strikes. Those terrible Tories, they let strikes happen. They had no idea how to deal with the unions. Lo and behold, actually in office, dealing with the BMA, which is incredibly powerful, and its critics would say also has a strain of political activism in it rather than only trying to stand up for the rights of doctors. Actually, after all, the BMA can behave in a way that many unions believe they're absolutely right to be incredibly tough on the people on the opposite side of the negotiating table. I think also the timing of Keir Starmer's intervention is important because, as you said, it's right now over this next few days that resident doctors are able to tell their union online whether or not they think this improved offer from the Health Secretary is up to scratch. But you're in this weird situation where government sources would say, look, at least they've put it to members. At least they're seeing that they're testing the waters. So there's a possibility that it might be called off. But actually, the government themselves, just as patients are or members of the public are, they're in limbo. They don't actually know what's going to happen next. So in the meantime, they've got to crack on with planning for what could be a very disruptive strike of several days at a time when there's immense pressure on health services, all the while hoping to goodness, crossing their fingers, that actually enough resident doctors go online over the weekend to think, you know what, actually, is this the right thing to do?
I spent some time in the sort of classical neo-Georgian HQ of the British Medical Association.
Ooh, in a very fancy bit of London.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to really understand the life of people who save lives. So this is a row, and you and me don't actually save lives for a living.
No.
So I want to be clear that I respect the people in the NHS and it's something that in asking sniffy questions, it's amazing to think that of the work the NHS does. Everyone has a story of someone or themselves being saved by the NHS, and one of the people who has a story like that is Wes Streeting.
Yes, indeed.
So, I mean, I want to get that out there because at newscasters are nurses, doctors and hospital porters. But one of the things that they said to me was it's that they say they're going to improve their conditions and then they don't do it quickly enough. So one of the new offers from Wes Streeting is to prioritise British medical graduates for training posts. And this is about career progression. So I asked Dr. Callum Parr from the BMA, does he meet doctors who say, let's call the strike off? That was the question I asked on Newsnight, and here's what he said.
So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. So for some doctors, there are things in there that they might like and they might want to vote for, but the deal is notably missing some other things like pay. So really this is what the members are going to feed back on as to whether they think there is enough in there to call off the strikes.
But do you meet doctors who say, let's call it off? You must meet some people who've made up their mind one way or the other. Do you meet some who want to stop?
So there are some people who are really worried about unemployment. So we are currently in an employment cycle now for doctors. So this is where they apply for jobs to become the consultants and GPs of the future. So some of those doctors are worried, and I think there are some things in there that they might find that they want to vote for.
But do you mean to answer the question yes? If I'm asking you, do you meet doctors who want to call off the strike? In a one-word answer, it's...
Yes.
You do. Now, that's obviously... yes and no, but there are doctors.
It's interesting and it's hard to get a read on it. So someone in government said to me this afternoon, we're recording at 10 to 2 on Saturday, they said actually it's quite difficult to get a handle on where the body of opinion is.
It is.
Because you have online, guess what, our favourite topic, online there's a pretty shouty debate. Online there are people who feel incredibly strongly about this, as they're entitled to do, expressing their opinions in a very, very trenchant way. Then most people who are doctors, maybe they're working today, maybe they're listening to Newscast, maybe they're doing a shift, or maybe they're doing a Christmas shopping, or maybe they're asleep because they were working overnight in a crowded A&E department. For most people, online activism and being politically involved in this isn't really what this is about. This is about their working conditions and whether or not they think the deal that the government's now putting forward for them is something that's good enough. And the government doesn't really have a handle on where that body of opinion will be. So it's sort of interesting. They really are in limbo. And also, look, whatever happens with this strike, whether it's on or off, with the flu spreading as it is, unquestionably, there's going to be an awful lot of pressure. There already is an awful lot of pressure on health services at what's already a busy time of year because it's come early, as you say, and timing is so important.
And one of the most sort of coal-faced parts of our life is the NHS. That is, you cut the Britain open and you get the NHS. So there we have the intervention of the Prime Minister. It's why I wielded The Guardian at the start, because that's where he's written.
And the BMA has hit back to that article and Wes Streeting's comments today and accused the government of scaremongering. So resident doctors might over the weekend decide as a group that they don't want to go on strike after all, that it's worth thinking about this offer, taking it seriously, or perhaps it's worth delaying the strike action until after Christmas. But it's very clear that the heads of both serpents, if you like, there's no sign at all from them calming things down, because the politicians have been cracking up the rhetoric and the BMA has done that too by accusing them of scaremongering.
And unlike journalists, doctors are held in very high regard by the British public.
Yes.
And I say that again because obviously it can look like, we're trying to dismiss the concerns of people who are very important in our life, which I don't dismiss them, but there is a big political row about it. And they are losing public opinion on this. The poll shows that the public, although they really respect and love doctors, the support for this strike is ebbing away in the public.
It's also important to note, I think, as well, doctors, obviously, as a group, they don't all think the same way.
Exactly.
There are also tensions between doctors of an older generation and the younger generation, just like in any profession. So, this is a checkerboard with all sorts of different pieces and different feelings and different sentiments. But the kind of politics of it, I think, has taken a crank up in the last 24 hours.
You do.
As the government desperately hopes that the resident doctors are going to call it off. They feel encouraged that at least they're having this online consultation over the weekend, which wasn't a given. Whether that transpires into a better result and the strike is actually called off, we will see. And on Monday, the result of that will be revealed and we'll see what happens next.
So what is the union relationship with the Labour Party like at the moment, given that Labour is the party of the trade unions?
Very difficult. For several different reasons. Firstly, some of the unions are really unhappy about what they perceive as the repeated rollbacks on the employment rights bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment. And some of the unions think that the government's given too much away, too much has been surrendered, and that the bill is going to end up unrecognisable to what it was meant to be, which is the most sweeping reform to workers' rights that you've seen in a generation. So some of the unions are very unhappy about how that has been filleted. The sort of more mainstream unions, if you like, say the Unison or the GMB, those big, clunky unions who've got huge numbers of members and huge amounts of political power, they are generally, that's the sort of unions in the middle, I would say, are very worried, I think, about the government's seeming failure to really get to grips with governing in many ways. Of course, to be pleased about things like removing the limits on bigger families getting some benefits. But I think there's deep anxiety in the sort of centre of union opinion about the government that they helped to put in power.
Funding,
failing to perform. And that anxiety is real too about the quality of the Prime Minister's leadership and his ability to do a good job, not just in the last 18 months, but I'm not sure that confidence among the union movement in general in his ability to turn that round is high. Now, of course, you then get the unions who maybe are more shouty, or their fans might say they're the ones who are more radical, they're more willing to speak out in ways. Some of those unions are the smaller ones that aren't actually officially affiliated, to use the jargon. So whether that might be the University Lecturers Union or one of the teaching unions, and the ones who tend to have more spiky language and who'd be more sort of visibly of the left, rather than people who are, we're really big and powerful and we really want to work with the Labour Party. But one of the powerful people who has been with us in the studio, Sharon Gray, and the leader of Unite, has for some time been dangling the possibility that her union might stop writing cheques for the Labour Party. Now, Unite and Labour, I should say, have had a difficult relationship in lots of ways for a while. It's been fractious if not fractured, but fractious. It's like sort of relatives who really love arguing with each other. It's also worth saying that union leaders themselves have to run for election, and generating headlines and saying spiky things can be a way of themselves reaffirming their own political support. But there's definitely a possibility, there is a real possibility that Unite will officially pull up stumps and stop giving Labour money. And they are one of the biggest donors, depending on which period of time you look at. Are they the biggest or not? Depends on when you look at the money. But it is a serious risk that Unite might pull up stumps. But the other unions that are less shouty, I think they're probably kind of going to stay in the bag. But even Christina McAnee, actually, who is currently the leader of Unison, the big health union, the last time she was on the show with us on a Sunday morning, she was quite explicit. She wasn't confident that Keir Starmer was going to take Labour into the next election. And from her, who's seen as quite a sort of, moderate figure who wants to be constructive, that was quite a remark to make. And I was quite surprised that she went that far in a public.
Now, we spend a lot of time talking about the ECHR.
Yes.
But you've deliberately asked me to be the person who has to say the EHRC letters.
It's an acronym. What a fun parlour game. Yes. And what is the EHRC?
The Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which is a UK-based organisation, unlike the ECHR, to which we are a signatory.
That's right. And the EHRC is the body that is in charge of essentially designing the rules that protect people's race, their human rights, if they are disabled, their sexuality, all sorts of things. And it is, I suppose, it's kind of like the watchdog in a way. It can also be critical of the government if a piece of legislation, if they worry that that's going to somehow have a detrimental effect on human rights, they can call that out, and they are accountable to Parliament. And most particularly in the last couple of years, they've been part of our political conversation because of the often angry, sometimes very controversial debate about the clash between women's rights and the rights of transgender people. Since the Supreme Court ruled in April that it was biological sex that was important rather than gender, since then, the EHRC has been trying to come up with the new rules that are going to have huge consequences for the kinds of changing rooms or loos that businesses or employers have to provide, or what sports teams should do. And the interim guidance that was produced essentially caused huge controversy because it kind of, in reality, would have prevented any transgender person from using a facility that they wanted to according to the gender that they choose to live in. And it basically said this all has to be decided because of biological sex. And their interpretation of that Supreme Court ruling was very controversial indeed.
Now, you've been speaking to the new boss because the leadership has just changed. Just as the Supreme Court decisions come a few months ago, the leadership of this very important role, which is legally important, but it's also part of our political culture now to have an opinion on this. So you get parties on the left asked, people on the left asked, can a woman have a penis?
Yes.
And also, are all pregnant people women? This is a sort of question that you're asked all the time.
It is. And it's a question that mainstream politicians have been used to having to answer. And actually, it's an issue that when she was in government, Kemi Badenoch made a lot of play and she got a lot of political attention for, in her view, calling some of that out. And she would say she took a much more common sense view than what was a sort of political fashion where you did have Keir Starmer sitting squirming and sort of unable to answer those questions because he was very afraid of offending one group or another. So into this walks the new boss, Dr. Mary-Ann Stephenson, having taken over from Baroness Faulkner, who was seen as being very outspoken on these issues, who said that the government's abandoned women's rights, who said that the law from the Supreme Court was actually very, very clear, and who's seen by many trans groups as having taken that organisation to a place that is too harsh, and a situation where some trans groups would say that trans people are being excluded because of what the Supreme Court says. So for all of those reasons, and I'm giving rather a lot of convoluted detail, but Dr. Mary-Ann Stephenson has a very important job. And there's also a huge amount of pressure on her to be clear about what people are actually meant to do now. So first of all, I was asking her, trying to get clarity on what will happen in real life if a transgender person wants to use the facilities that match their gender rather than their biological sex. What should happen in that situation? And should businesses or swimming pool attendants or people who work in a coffee shop, how should they manage it? Should they actually be going around and checking that people are using the right facilities? This is what she said.
Mm-hmm. So nobody is expecting there to be a toilet police, but equally, if there are situations where there are complaints about regular problems, then people might need to kind of improve signage, improve explanations, make sure they've got alternative provision and so on. But these are things that can be sorted out.
The other difficult thing for her, which I asked her about, is in the past, she donated money to the legal campaign of a lawyer who said she'd been discriminated against because she had gender critical views. Now, gender critical is what's become known as the way of describing women, although not only women, but women in particular who would say, I'm worried about access to single sex spaces. I'm concerned that women's rights have taken a backseat to the rights of transgender people who want choice over how they behave in the world and the kinds of places that they have access to. And because Mary-Ann Stephenson had donated to that cause, some trans groups said, well, hang on a minute, she can't be neutral in this. How can she possibly be neutral? She's the wrong person for the job. So I put that to her and asked her if really she could be objective, because to some people she's given the impression that in a very difficult debate, she had picked a side.
I donated to the case because I was frustrated about situations where women were being harassed and losing their jobs on the basis of lawfully held beliefs. And that case was successful. If that's taking a side, it's taking a side on the side of kind of democratic norms and open discussion and dialogue.
It's worth saying that a lot of change has already started happening because of the Supreme Court decision. Mm-hmm. Without seeing the guidance that the EHRC has given to the government. And the suspicion is that the Labour is sitting on it because they think there's going to cause a stramash when they publish it.
Third use of stramash in one episode of the podcast, which is excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's the criticism, is that Labour doesn't want to upset its own activists. That's the suspicion, is they're sitting on it. But as you say, some organisations have already, basically taken their own legal advice. If you look at the Women's Institute, have changed some of their rules. The Girl Guides have changed some of their rules. I think there's a demonstration even against that today. But, a normal business or a members organisation and all the rest, they don't want to be going around having to pay a lawyer to work out what they're meant to do, who they're allowed to allow into their premises, what on earth they're meant to do. So there's a huge amount of pressure on her and the government to be clear about this. But it's also worth saying that EHRC has lots and lots of responsibilities. So we also talked to her about the government's plan to tinker with the Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR. We also asked her about her views on race and whether race has returned as part of our political conversation in a way that she is comfortable with. And it's very interesting, though, just last word on this. Having met her and talked to her at some length, I can see part of the reason why the government would have wanted her in that job, even though some MPs thought she didn't have the right experience for it. Because in a very hot and angry debate, she comes across as someone who's very calm, very measured, talks about things in a very careful and precise way. And after years of a very, very angry debate, whatever you make of the decisions that she might make in that job, you can see why the government has tried to bring a character like that into a very fraught territory of conversation. And maybe having her in that post will create a new environment in that conversation. I'm not sure that will prove to be the case given how strong some people's feelings are, but we'll see.
Actually, I should say I'm doing an interesting thing, I think, for once.
What?
I've spoken to Dame Sheila Hancock.
Oh, that's amazing.
Who loves driving.
Right.
And she's 92. And she takes it very seriously. So she's just taken an advanced driving test.
Good for her.
I think so.
Did you go for a spin?
Yes.
Where did you go?
We went round near the Thames, round West London.
How lovely.
It was. And she's a great driver. But it's one of the things that comes up in families at Christmas is when should Granny or Grandad give up the car keys?
Oh, yeah. I know a thing or two about that, but I'm not going to go there.
No, I think many people listening will have a view on this. And so, but I always thought it's the first time I've heard that. You know what I'm going to do? I know there's concern about drivers who are 90. I've just taken and passed an advanced driving test.
Good for her.
Good for her.
What kind of motor does she have?
She has a very neat little hybrid, which she drives brilliantly. She parked it like we were on Top Gear.
That's amazing. What a lovely thing. I look forward to listening to that one, catch up after we've done the telly and the Sunday Newscast.
What have you got on?
Goodness knows. Oh, we've got the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, and a Christmas treat from Kate Winslet and friends.
Oh, how lovely.
Very lovely. All to be revealed tomorrow morning on BBC One, and we'll be back tomorrow afternoon.
Goodbye.
Bye.